A rich man disguised himself as a beggar to find a wife in a beauty contest. Suddenly, a line of beautiful women formed in front of an imposing television studio in Rio de Janeiro. The curious people passing by wondered what all those girls with such extravagant makeup and dresses were doing at the entrance to the gate. Those who stopped to watch saw the march in high heels entering the grand studio. Those 27 women were preparing to compete in a fierce beauty contest, each of them representing a Brazilian state, and in addition to their beauty, they brought some cultural knowledge of their regions. What they didn't imagine was that, in addition to competing for the winner's crown, they were also participating in an unofficial contest. Guilherme, the youngest son of the station owner, wanted to marry a beautiful woman, but he didn't have much patience to go out and meet new people. Used to always having everything he wanted, he decided he wanted to marry one of the candidates in the contest that would be broadcast on his father's broadcaster. However, he didn't just want to marry a beautiful woman, the chosen one should also be detached from money. In short, he wanted to marry a beautiful woman, but without her being interested only in his money. However, Guilherme knew that if the girls found out who their father was, they would become obstinate in marrying him. The 35-year-old wanted to get married, but he didn't want the marriage to happen just for financial reasons. Although he never felt that a woman had a sincere interest in him, his father's money was always an obstacle. While Guilherme prepared to put his plan into practice, Isabella, the producer's assistant responsible for organizing the beauty contest, ran to give instructions to those 27 girls. Isabella, aged 30, had her competitor's hair as her main concern. Always with messy hair, Isabella is usually without makeup and her clothes tend to be wrinkled or tattered. For the competent but slovenly assistant, it was a surprise and an irony to be assigned to work at the beauty pageant. His role is to guide the candidates and provide them with the recording schedule. The big night of the contest will be in 2 days, and during this period, everyone needs to make some special recordings for the program. These recordings include outdoors, and the next one scheduled is in a park close to the station. The idea is that the girls, wearing the banners of their respective states, tell a little about themselves in front of the camera and explain to the judges and the public why they believe they should be the winners. Trying to ignore the less beautiful women, Isabella struggled in vain to be heard. In the end, those who lost for not listening to the instructions were the candidates themselves. If they had paid attention to the messages given by the assistant, they would have heard the recommendation to be friendly to passers-by in the park, as you never know when the camera is filming. Any slip-up could compromise the candidates. However, most of the girls were more focused on noticing the defects or qualities of the other competitors. Even so, Isabella couldn't say that they were all indifferent or treated her badly. Mia and Evelyn were disciplined and very friendly, always paying attention and asking questions to avoid problems. Secretly, Isabella hoped that one of them would take the crown. With effort, Isabella managed to lead the 27 candidates to the vans that would take them to the park. Despite the location being close to the broadcaster's studio, it was crucial to use motorized transport, as the candidates could not get sweaty or tired. After all, they needed to look good on camera. Guilherme asked the makeup and soap opera characterization professionals at his father's network for help to disguise himself as a beggar. The young man had the idea of being seen as such by the girls competing in the beauty contest, to observe their reactions. As the youngest son of the television mogul, he had to disguise his face with makeup so as not to be easily recognized, as many people knew him from the photos that appeared on social media, in celebrity columns in newspapers, magazines and blogs. Even with the makeup, Guilherme still had a pretty face, which could attract any of the girls. However, to look like a beggar, he used makeup tricks to simulate dirt. The homeless person's clothing was created based on costumes used in the network's soap operas. Guilherme was able to feel how the actors were preparing to play characters on the small screen. The recordings in the park continued normally, like all those made for the competition, that is, in the midst of real chaos for some candidates. They invented the most absurd reasons to pick on the competitors. In the midst of this real war, it was up to Isabella to become the ambassador of peace. The assistant did her best to appease her rivals, but this was an almost impossible mission. She was busy trying to understand how Nora, one of the candidates, managed to break the zipper on Grace's dress, another contestant, using just a handbag. This type of trap and trickery was something new for Isabella, who until then had only worked in the production of crime programs for the competing network. Sometimes, those girls vying for the crown of beauty seemed more dangerous than many famous criminals. While consoling Grace and trying to contact one of the station's seamstresses, Isabella did not notice that a beggar approached the recording area. As they were recording in a park, it was not possible to keep onlookers away, but the producers really did not imagine that a homeless person would decide to interact with the candidates. Nora, the evildoer with the zipper-destroying bag, was the first to notice the poorly dressed man hovering nearby. Interestingly, she even thought he was handsome, but, with deep disdain, considered him a nobody. Pointing to the man, Nora said to Isabella, "Look over there, there's a beggar hanging around the recordings. Get that thing out of here immediately." Isabella, already exhausted from listening to those girls' complaints, calmly looked at where Nora's finger was pointing. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "That man isn't hurting anyone, and the park is public, meaning he has the same right to be here as we do." Unsatisfied, Nora continued to grumble and threaten to complain to the program director. At that moment, Isabella wondered what she was doing with her career, as she knew she would hear a long speech from Ricardo, the attractions director. Ricardo, a middle-aged man, obsessed with his appearance, never dates women over 25 years old. He had already undergone almost all existing aesthetic procedures to keep his skin young and looking renewed, but the result of so many procedures it was an excessively stretched and expressionless face. As soon as Nora mentioned Ricardo, he appeared to check the progress of the recording of the external scenes. The beggar was still there, but the candidates either ignored his presence or mistreated him. Ricardo, upon arriving, didn't even notice that figure so out of place among the other people. However, Nora ran to complain about the beggar's presence to the director. To make matters worse, the candidate also stated that Isabella refused to remove that beggar from there. With a less than happy look, Ricardo turned to the assistant and asked why she was being so reluctant. Maybe she didn't know it, but there were many people who wanted her job. Shyly, as she tried to adjust the zipper on Grace's dress, Isabella responded that she valued the chance and did nothing as she could not remove a person from a public space. Furthermore, the girl made a point of emphasizing that it was necessary to remember that there were several press outlets covering that recording. If they kicked a beggar out of there, everything would be recorded and it would be on social media in a few seconds. Recognizing that the assistant, who always seemed slovenly, was right, Ricardo replied to Nora that the best thing to do was to ignore the beggar. In the meantime, the homeless man, who was actually Guilherme in disguise, had already circulated throughout the recording area. He took advantage of the fact that many of the candidates ignored him and listened to their conversations. Most of them talked about trivialities or criticized their competitors. There was no interesting subject to pay attention to. The moment he heard the most relevant conversation was when the scruffy assistant managed to tear herself away from her tasks and called someone who seemed to be family. The girl commented that she was quite stressed, because some of the candidates were undisciplined and did not make her work easier. If that wasn't enough, she wanted to have more free time to dedicate herself to documentary work about the lives of animals in big cities. From what Guilherme could understand, Isabella was a journalist and always dreamed of working in her field of training. However, due to his appearance, he never stood a chance. At that moment, the young heir realized that the world can be quite unfair to those who do not have a standard of beauty. Listening to Isabella's insightful observations about the whole situation, he could almost find her beautiful. When he found himself thinking like this, Guilherme remembered why he was there disguised as a beggar. He wanted to find his future wife, the woman he would marry and have children with. Being young, beautiful and very rich, he could not want anything less than a stunning woman by his side, although he recognized the injustice of the world for those who did not have a standard beauty. He would not be the one to start this revolution. The young man then realized that just observing the girl's reaction to his beggar look was not enough, he needed them to talk to him. Guilherme approached Stella and Mia, two candidates, asking if one of them could help him with some change to buy a loaf of bread. Stella looked him up and down and replied, "If you want to eat, go to work. A dirty man like you shouldn't even speak to beautiful women like us." Mia, on the other hand, was nicer. She took a $5 bill out of the little purse she was carrying and handed it to the beggar, smiling playfully. Mia asked if the man was really going to eat or if he wanted that money to drink. Guilherme, who was assigning grades to each of the candidates, then thought that perhaps Mia would be the ideal future wife. With a grateful smile on his lips, he said he wanted the money to eat. Living on the street, I needed to count on the kindness of others. Not so convinced by the answer, Mia said, "My boyfriend always says that, even if you don't know if it's for drinks or food, it's important to help others." As soon as he heard this sentence, Guilherme felt his smile disappear, and then he turned his back to that beautiful young woman. He couldn't believe that the nicest of the candidates up until that moment had a boyfriend, but that was predictable. Beautiful and good person as he was, it would be strange otherwise. Guilherme asked other candidates for coins, but only 2 others gave him a contribution to eat. Several others ignored him and even treated him badly. When the recording was almost coming to an end, Guilherme saw Isabella sitting in the shade of a tree with a sad expression. Even though he had no interest in that girl, he couldn't resist the urge to talk. Guilherme, still dressed as a beggar, carefully approached Isabella. She was startled a little when she saw his shadow approaching. The boy prepared himself to be snubbed again, and this time by a woman who wasn't even pretty. But, to his surprise, the assistant laughed in a curious way and said, "I'm sorry I got scared, I thought it was one of the candidates coming to ask me for something." "Impossible, I'm so tired already." Guilherme smiled at Isabella and replied, "I apologize, I scared you by being so quiet." The assistant said, "I saw you were asking the pageant girls for money to eat. I guess they didn't contribute much. I don't have any money, but I brought these sandwiches for lunch. If you want, I can give you one of them." Guilherme was amazed at the generosity of that girl, who helped a complete stranger who caused a series of problems for her. After all, if the candidates had spent the last few hours bothering her, it was because of him. At that moment, he felt a slight shame about what he was doing and thought about telling Isabella the truth. However, if he did that, he could put his plan in jeopardy and not be able to choose a candidate to marry. Guilherme then sat next to the production assistant under that tree and ate the sandwich she offered. Moved by the man's situation, Isabella thought that perhaps she could help him a little more. She asked if he wanted to go to her house to take a shower. As he lived with his older brother, he could lend clean clothes to the homeless man. He asked if her brother wouldn't be angry with this attitude. The girl quickly replied no, as he used to be very generous. Furthermore, it had been some time since he had set aside some clothes for donation. Guilherme accepted the invitation and, after doing so, he asked himself why he had agreed to go to that girl's house. Of all the women on that recording, Isabella was the last one to pique his interest, but now there he was, getting on a bus with that girl. People on public transport looked at him strangely, but Isabella's conversation was so interesting that he didn't even notice those looks. How could someone so devoid of grace and elegance be so fun? When they arrived at Isabella's house, Guilherme realized that she lived in a very simple place. It wasn't ugly, but it didn't really have much comfort. Being a television assistant didn't pay much money. But, although the house was not big or luxurious, there was something special, the affection between Isabella and her brother, Tomas. The boy initially found it strange to see his sister walking with a homeless man, but she explained that that boy appeared during the recording of the program and that he needed help. Tomas, as generous as his sister, helped welcome the guest. Guilherme was able to take a shower and wear one of Tomas's clothes that would be donated. During dinner, Tomas was thoughtful. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something amazing. Do you want to attract a lot of money into your life? Learn how to do it with the secret content that I will leave in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial life. Let's continue. He had already seen Guilherme's face somewhere. This impression became even stronger after the beggar took a shower and put on clean clothes. But where would he have seen it? Without reaching a conclusion, Tomás went to sleep, as he would have to wake up early the next day. Before going to bed, Tomás told Isabella to put the boy to sleep in the living room and lock the door to his room. If that guest tried something, she was supposed to scream. Although she knew she shouldn't bring strangers into the house, Isabella wasn't afraid. She didn't think the beggar would do anything to her. But something seemed strange to the girl. When he lay down to sleep, the assistant understood what that story sounded like. Guilherme, although dressed like a beggar, did not act or speak like one. However, perhaps this was due to the fact that he was not always homeless. Isabella could never have imagined that that boy, who looked so poor in his clothes, was the son of the owner of the television station where she worked. The next day, after having breakfast with Tomás, Guilherme asked his new friend if he could go with her to the television station area. Worried that he would cause more trouble with the contest candidates, Isabella asked what his objective was in go to that region. Guilherme replied that he just wanted to go back to the place where he used to ask for help. Tomás asked Guilherme if he was interested in finding a job. Maintaining his disguise, the young man said yes, and Tomás promptly replied that he could get him an interview at the factory where he worked, to work on the assembly line. Goodwill and attention were needed. Guilherme said he would like the opportunity, but that on that specific day he needed to return to the region where Isabella found him. Noticing the boy's distress about the place he had come from, Isabella said she would take him, as long as he promised not to ask for money from the contest candidates. Guilherme thought he wouldn't ask for money, but perhaps he would ask for one of their hands. It was a shame that Mia already had a boyfriend. She was generous and still had great beauty, but all was not lost. He could still discover that one of the others met all the desired characteristics. At that moment, Guilherme realized that the appearance of any of those candidates, with Isabella's personality, would result in the perfect woman. It was also a shame that the assistant wasn't that pretty, but still looking good. Guilherme shook his head to get these thoughts out of his mind. When Isabella saw him make this gesture, she laughed and asked what he was thinking about, which gave him so much disgust. Awkwardly, the boy replied that he was just lost in his own dreams. The two took the bus to go to the station. On the long way, no one gave Guilherme a dirty look, as he was now clean, all thanks to the generosity of Isabella and her brother. The two got off at the bus stop near the television station, and she then said goodbye to Guilherme, wishing him luck. The girl reminded the boy that his brother had offered him a job opportunity at the factory. Guilherme promised that he would look for Isabella again. As soon as she entered the studio, Isabella felt all her peace and tranquility disappear. That documentary project about the animals that lived in the city never seemed so far away. Again, she had to take the candidates to the park close to the station. Some recordings needed to be redone because they weren't good. In part, this was the fault of the candidates who did not pay attention to their instructions while recording the scenes. Again, Isabella saw Guilherme approaching the recording. It wasn't possible that, after everything she did for him, that boy would go there and try to ruin the recordings again. As soon as he approached, even though he was better groomed than before, he generated great dissatisfaction among several candidates. Laura, one of the most beautiful girls in the competition, did not hesitate to complain about being, in her words, harassed by a beggar. Guilherme then replied that he wasn't doing anything much. After all, the park is public and he can watch the filming. Ricardo had been irritated since the day before and approached, ready to shout. However, when he realized who that boy was, he felt his voice disappear. Guilherme, afraid of being unmasked, decided to step forward and said to Ricardo, "I'm a beggar, but I have every right to watch the recording in a public place. Just because I'm a beggar doesn't mean I don't have my rights." He emphasized the word beggar so that Ricardo would understand that he should not blow his cover. The director soon realized that there was something behind that homeless costume. Ricardo then said with rudeness in his voice, "Really, you beggar, I can't expel you from a public place, but I hope you behave yourself and don't bother the girls with a very clumsy act." Ricardo ended the scene with a not-so-subtle wink. Guilherme got angry, thinking how a director could act so badly. However, the man still considered that his cover was protected. Isabella, who watched that scene from a distance, found it very strange that Ricardo backed away. The normal thing for that terrible little man would be to keep shouting until the security guards took the beggar away. But, the least of the evils, if Ricardo had already accepted that the homeless man would be hanging around, she would have less difficulty controlling the situation. The afternoon of recording passed with relative ease. Guilherme tried to interact with the participants, but the best he could do was eat another sandwich in the shade of a tree. Isabella asked if the street man would like to sleep at her house again, but this time Guilherme said no. Without much explanation, he turned his back and walked away. Isabella was a little sad and a little irritated by the disdain that Guilherme showed. The next day was quite busy for Isabella. The contest would be broadcast live that night. In the morning, she had a quick coffee with Tomás and told him everything that happened the day before. Her brother was also unhappy to hear that their guest of honor had acted in a dismissive manner towards his sister. When Isabella commented that, despite Guilherme living on the street, he didn't behave like someone in need, Tomás agreed. It was strange that this young man spoke correctly and was so polite at the table. Isabella's brother continued to have the strong impression that he knew Guilherme from somewhere. Late, Isabella left the house almost running and without eating the second piece of toast. Some time later, Tomás took advantage of his day off from the factory to meet his girlfriend, Aria. The girl loved listening to the stories of Isabella's work that Tomás told her. This was the closest contact she had with television, and it was exciting. Tomás liked to illustrate the stories he told with images from social media. When talking about the competition his sister was working on, he opened the network's social networks. Going through the images, he came across a photo of the station owner's heirs. At first glance, Tomás thought he was seeing things wrong, but then he realized he was right. I had actually seen Guilherme before. Guilherme's face was familiar to him because he always visited the network's social media profiles, precisely to tell Aria about his day-to-day life on television. That's how he saw Guilherme's face. But now it remained to be seen why that daddy's boy pretended to be a beggar and took shelter in the house of a poor assistant, without telling Aria that he and his sister had shelter in their house. The heir to the television station, Tomás, decided he needed to tell his sister about this. He took a print of Guilherme's photo and sent it to Isabella, who was busy breaking up a fight between two candidates who were twice his size. Isabella didn't see her brother's message. All that confusion only got worse as it got closer to the start time of the competition. Isabella could only think that if she hadn't gone crazy by that moment, she wouldn't go crazy again. The contest began broadcasting at 10 p.m. punctually. The eliminatory tests were held and, with each elimination, Isabella had to prepare to break up fights between the eliminated candidates and those who continued. Many of those who left the competition wanted to advance against those who remained to try to ruin their clothes and hairstyles. Mia and Evelyn, the two candidates who were nice to Isabella, remained in the competition, and it was inevitable that she would root for one of them. However, Nora, who was also still in the competition, was a very strong candidate to beat. When there were only 3 of them left, it was announced that one of the television station's heirs would take the stage to announce the competition's big prizes. When Guilherme walked across the stage, wearing a beautiful, fitted suit, he surprised many people who had seen him as a beggar. Initially, Nora did not recognize him as the homeless man she had treated bad. But when she saw the surprise on Mia and Evelyn's faces, she soon realized. Amused by the surprise in the eyes of those present, Guilherme opened a wide smile and said, "My name is Guilherme and, in the last 2 days, I spent time with the candidates without properly introducing myself to them." Isabella, who was watching the program from behind the scenes, couldn't believe that that simple, poorly dressed boy who had slept at her house was, in fact, the heir to that station. Believing that it was a test for the competition, she wasn't even angry with Guilherme's lie. The boy told the audience that he became a beggar to get to know the candidates better and that he was surprised by the generosity of some of them. He went on to say, however, unfortunately, the world is still guided by appearances, and not everyone values people for who they are, but only for the clothes they wear. Without elaborating further, Guilherme announced that the winner would receive a cash prize, as well as a new car and a scholarship for a university course of her choice. They were excellent prizes, and one of those 3 young women would be awarded. Then the presenters announced that Evelyn had placed third. Therefore, the winner would be Nora or Mia. Isabella thought it was strange that Nora was in the final. Despite being very beautiful, she was one of the candidates who treated Guilherme the most badly. While thinking he was a beggar, how could she have gotten such a good grade to go to the final? Isabella began to think that perhaps Guilherme's speech was a big lie. Even though he said it was terrible that people judge others based on their appearance, that didn't take Nora out of the final. After a long commercial break, it was time to announce the beauty contest's grand champion. Everyone waited anxiously to find out which of the 2 girls would take home the crown and all those prizes. Isabella smiled when she heard the presenters shout together Mia's name as the big winner. The young woman, who was always friendly to everyone on the program, was voted the most beautiful in the competition. Nora tried to hide her sadness and anger. It was then that Isabella saw Guilherme approach the runner-up and say something to her. The girl smiled and nodded. It didn't take long for Isabella to find out that Guilherme had asked Nora out. Behind the scenes, the talk was that he wanted to get married and was looking for a beautiful wife. As Mia, the winner, was already committed, he decided to try something with the runner-up. At this moment, Isabella was very disappointed. All she could think about was how empty and a liar Guilherme was. If he had disguised himself as a beggar to find out what the candidates were really like, beyond their appearance, why was he asking the worst of them out? At least that competition was over and she could finally be reassigned to another project on the network. That's what she expected. Losing that job wasn't an option. When she was leaving the station to catch her bus, Isabella saw Guilherme talking intimately with Nora. The boy saw the assistant leaving and thought he would like to say goodbye to her. He ran towards Isabella, who, in turn, quickened her pace to avoid that conversation. Guilherme started shouting for her to wait for him. She then turned around and asked him what he wanted. Noticing that she was irritated, he apologized for pretending to be a beggar. Isabella looked him deep in the eyes and then said, "I don't care about your terrible interpretation of a beggar. What I can't understand is that you have a speech that is so detached from reality." He looked at her without understanding why she was being so harsh. The assistant then nodded towards Nora. Guilherme understood what she was trying to say and began to justify the unjustifiable. He said, "I realize that, unfortunately, I'm not going to find everything I'm looking for in a woman. So I decided that I would let myself be carried away by beauty. Maybe it's a mistake to go out with Nora, but she really is a very pretty girl." Isabella said, "So you didn't learn anything from your experience as a beggar," and left. Over the next few weeks, Guilherme began dating Nora, but even her beauty didn't make him happy. The girl spent all her time talking bad for Mia and complaining about having come second. When she started with this subject, Guilherme thought about the conversations he had with Isabella under the tree, eating sandwiches, or at the assistant's house. Broadcaster's journalism program. Even though she judged him so harshly for his choices, he wanted her to have good job opportunities. From the information he received, Guilherme knew that Isabella was doing very well. After several attempts to find the courage to go after her and talk, Guilherme finally went to the sector where she was working. Observing her from a distance, he realized that, even if she didn't have the standard beauty of beauty pageant participants, Isabella was very beautiful. It was then that he understood that it was always the slovenly assistant he wanted. That day he did not speak to Isabella, he ran out and called Nora to talk. The girl was excited, believing that she would be proposed to. However, He broke up with her, claiming that the two were too different. Nora didn't understand anything. Then, he went after Isabella again and, with 2 sandwiches in a bag, asked if she would agree to have a snack with him under a tree. Confused, but curious, the girl accepted. During this conversation, he asked if they could go out to get to know each other better. After a pause that seemed very long, Isabella said yes, but that, in addition to needing to be there, he would have to get Tomas' forgiveness. Worried, he questioned whether Isabella's brother had gotten angry. She then said, laughing, that it was just a joke. His brother thought it was funny that he saw a rich heir trying to pretend he was a beggar. Guilherme learned that he also acted badly by judging only by appearance and that, in the end, he acted like the candidates who belittled him. I hope you enjoyed this story full of twists and emotions. Remembering that I will leave in the first comment pinned, a method that will attract money into your life, so go there. If you liked it and want more exciting stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. A big hug and see you next time.